So I'm 29 years old now, and I've been playing Call of Duty for close to 2 decades. And I tell you, booting up Modern Warfare 3, COD really hits different after this whole Ukraine war thing. I went through this phase about a year ago where I was just lying on my couch all day, sick with COVID, amped up on Adderall and ginseng and pot, viciously depressed, on my laptop switching back and forth between pornography and videos of fights and police shootouts and of course combat footage, because this was shortly after the Ukraine war broke out. And this was really the first social media war. I mean, you have soldiers on both sides of the conflict just tweeting out their cell phone videos all day of all the fucked up shit they did to each other, and I'm just morbidly eating it up all day and binging on all these poor guys' final moments, getting chased down by exploding drones and squirming around on the ground in some cold field after their legs get blown off by some airstrike or something. And look, I've been on the internet for a while. I was there for Live Leak and World Star and the ISIS beheadings. I've seen some fucked up shit, but this is the first time I'm watching this kind of violence, and everyone involved just looks so much younger than me. There's something so much more twisted about watching these guys die and realizing they're just regular dudes who you probably played against in PUBG. Motherfuckers who've probably been in the comment sections with us here on YouTube. I don't mind aging too much, except for this madness where people my age or younger are being given all these serious responsibilities. Around that same time, I was walking around the Tenderloin district in San Francisco at like 3 a.m. because I couldn't sleep, and I ended up passing the police station. And it's just swarmed with drug addicts meandering aimlessly, muttering to themselves and convulsing violently on the ground. And there's this cop pacing back and forth in front of the station with like a fucking Spaz 12 slung over his shoulder. And this guy couldn't have been a day over 21. And I've played a lot of COD with a lot of guys, and I could just tell this guy was a quickscoper. And I'm just looking around, suddenly comprehending for the first time the demented Looney Tune nature of reality. The writer Kurt Vonnegut once said true terror is waking up one day and realizing the world is being run by your high school class. And I so get that now, but it's actually so much worse. Imagine if the world was someday going to be run by a bunch of randoms you played Call of Duty with. Oh, Christ. And I feel ridiculous because I don't want to be one of those old stiffs I used to hate, but now when I'm playing COD and I'm running around giving out free facials to all these Gen Z noobs with my P90, I feel a little bit kind of fucked up. I feel a little bit like I'm making light of the situation. I feel like I'm disrespecting all the poor dead guys I saw on Reddit who were like my age. I mean, can you imagine if it was like a school shooter video game? Everyone would think that was a little over the top, and it's like, yeah, school shootings make you wince more because it's innocent kids, but really, regular war is way more violent and has way more death and results in way more grief and tragedy, not to mention plenty of dead kids to boot. Shouldn't it be at least as weird to bond with the kids after church playing COD as it would be playing Sandy Hook School Shooter 2 Shooter Strikes Back? You know how COD does charity for vets sometimes? Wouldn't it be kind of darkly hilarious if a school shooter video game raised money for school shooting victims? The reason war doesn't feel as gross as school shootings is because school shootings are violence that isn't supposed to happen. War is violence that is supposed to happen, but it's like, what if it's fucking not? 10 years ago, I made a Russian friend playing Battlefield 4. I was on the Silk Road 24/7 server just running nothing but the Little Bird. And this guy would sit and repair my chopper for hours on end while I dropped 60 kill games non-stop. The guy barely spoke a word of English, but every now and then he would choke out in a thick Russian accent, "Watch out, bail," or most memorably, "You are good pilot." Now, of course, I'm rooting for Ukraine, and so every time a Ukrainian posts some video of themselves blowing apart some Russian tank and all its operators are clambering out of it aflame and screaming, I'm like, fuck yeah, get some! But then I always think, what if that's Paratic 77 out there? I hope poor Paratic makes it through this thing. I read an interesting Twitter thread about how before the war, many Russian experts were concerned about the rise of nationalist propaganda in Russian fiction. How more and more of their books and movies and television and video games were explicitly advocating lost cause, stabbed in the back narratives about how the world had wronged Russia during World War II and taken advantage of it ever since, and how it was the sacred duty of young men throughout Russia to take up arms against the West. The people who were paying attention realized well in advance that the Kremlin was getting the public psychologically prepared for something ugly. I sometimes wonder if something similar didn't happen here in the States and if it couldn't happen again. We are not ruled by one man the way they are in Russia, and the central government doesn't have that same kind of control over what gets published, but we do have a particular kind of culture, don't we? I remember back in high school football, the day before our big game against our crosstown rival, one of our coaches brought in his highlight reel from the Iraq War. 20 minutes of real-life chopper gunner footage thrown up the whole team on the shitty projector where we usually studied other teams' plays. It was supposed to pump us up, but I think it was mostly about the coach getting his own small dick hard. I realized at the time that I must be the only guy in the room who read the news, because how could anyone get pumped up about the Iraq War after we found out the whole purpose of the war, the WMDs, were as imaginary as the monsters under your bed? If it wasn't so tragic, the whole thing would belong on an episode of The Office or Curb Your Enthusiasm. But it wasn't just my football coach. Remember American Sniper? Look, obviously it's honorable to serve your country and protect your fellow Marines, but wouldn't it be preferable that the Marines weren't thrown needlessly into danger in the first place, just to line the pockets of Dick Cheney and Big Oil? The imaginary objective, the fact that we lost thousands of lives needlessly and thousands more who came home without limbs and fucked up in the head, none of that gets brought up in the movie. The message is clear. Cross your fingers the country gets into another war so that you too can be a superhero someday. And what is COD's message? Now, the science is clear that video games don't make people violent, but they sure do make you feel like a superhero sometimes, don't they? I booted up the OG09 MW2 campaign the other day. I was struck by how the game's beginning was so obviously derived straight from the real-life invasion of Afghanistan. The opening mission could have been taken straight out of newsreel footage at the time. And why wouldn't it be? It is Modern Warfare, after all. Never mind that we lost that one too. Never mind that the Afghanistan papers leaked and we found out Bush knew as early as 2007 that the war was unwinnable, that Al-Qaeda couldn't be defeated and would simply reassume power the moment US troops pulled out. That every dollar spent and every life lost after 2007 was for no good reason at all, other than presidents being too chicken shit to admit the war was lost. All that matters is that you felt like a fucking champion cutting through 300 terrorists like butter while you got to pretend some cool voice actors were your close friends. Rolling through Afghani streets, stacking bodies with my bros, feeling cool because they call the bad guys tangos. The enemy's motivations as completely unclear in-game as they ever were in real life, but they look Arabic and shout in Farsi, and that's all an American teenager needed to know 15 years ago. The gameplay spliced between quotes from Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney every time you die. I remember how exciting the MW2 campaign was, of churning out Xbox achievements on the highest difficulty and the growing certainty that you could take on anything all by yourself, that you could finally satisfy that innate obsession with violence embedded in every teenage boy, and maybe even be loved for it someday. Probably this was exactly what my football coach wanted us to feel. And when the neocons finally get their way and start a war with Iran, how many signups will they get from disaffected young men with no purpose, no friends, no money, and nothing fun to do? Stuck chasing that nostalgic thrill they once felt toppling dictators with funny names on Call of Duty.